Thank you for coming. Welcome. It's good to see so many Star Wars fans in here. Hope I'm not insulting anyone on that one. So this session is about, well, it says SSO, but we are also touching a bit on things like how does the endpoint management solution support the workspace and how do we configure it, how do we deploy it, how do we make this a great user experience when you're a first-time user on the workspace app, depending on which platform you're on. So as you probably can see here, my name is Morten Lauritsen. I work as a domain specialist, so I work in the field. And my colleague, Ejel Braca, is a systems engineer, also working in the field. So some of the stuff in here is not only from the documentation side, but also from what we've picked up during the years working with these types of technologies. So there you go, Ejel.
Yeah.
Your turn.
So just a quick overview. What we're going to go over. We've got some almost live demos.
Yeah.
We were supposed to do live, but yeah, things change. So today we're going to do what we think is crucial to the experience that you meet when you join a workspace solution. So basically that's what we are going to demonstrate. And of course, we've chosen some of the really tricky ones, third-party application, which has always been a challenge for both Morten and me when we run into you guys in the field. So that's where we put our money in this demo. So to lead off, one of the things that we see a lot when going to the field is everybody is aware of this going on, this disruption in our normal business. Lot of changes happening. We meet a lot of people who say they are on the way away from Citrix, but what they're actually meeting is that they're moving into SaaS app, web apps, moving away from 32-bit application that needs virtualization. So what they're actually saying, we're moving more and more away from virtualization. Then the funny thing is we run into customers, well, we want to secure the way we access these web apps. So we need a secure browser. And one of the offerings that Citrix actually has is a secure browser, and we're able to virtualize any kind of browser experience. And they say, oh, we really wanted that because that's one of our big issues within the companies. So we see people shifting their virtualization to different scenarios. And we also see a big shift into web app and SaaS apps. And the thing that people forget sometimes is that web apps and SaaS apps are equally complex in the way they need to be handled, especially around SSO. And Citrix has had to learn that recently, that we need to enforce our single sign-on architecture throughout the services that we adopt. So one of the demos today is Slack. Slack is a huge tool. It started out as this shadow IT solution for engineers to chat in. And we had this whole war is a strong word, disagreement how the communication within Citrix actually, are we using GoToMeetings, are we using Skype, are we using different communication? And probably a lot of you can say, yeah, we've been through that. Then Slack showed up, and now Slack is becoming one of the preferred ways of finding information within Citrix. If you can find it, if you can find the right channel and the right person. And it's grown into being the de facto standard on how you communicate with our engineering team. And that was a good example of a technology that was brought in and it had its own life, and now it's part of our single sign-on infrastructure. A lot of things that are also changing is the way we perceive networking. So one of the big changes hitting us in a couple of years that you guys have to take a stand on or a position on is, for example, 5G. I was recently in Barcelona, and 5G is going to hit us like we haven't seen yet. It's going to be a tsunami of services all of a sudden are going to be available.
So Ejel, would that mean that how you do networking is getting more easy or more complex?
It's becoming more complex.
So that's in direct contradiction to what many perceives, which is let's move to the cloud and we don't have to worry about networking in the same sense as we do in our internal infrastructure. But that's not right.
No. It's gonna be like nothing we've seen yet, and the amount of data. You heard David talk about we are moving into the Utah era of data, and I completely agree with that. Another thing that we are also seeing is that people or users, if you can call users people.
I'm not so sure about that, but anyways, but go on.
One of the things that David pointed out is that people are comparing the service they are getting from consumer services. And of course, for a lot of airlines, a lot of banks, the IT front is becoming the battlefield for customers. How easy it is to use. And they're pouring a lot of money into that. Good example is multi-factor authentication. They know that they need to secure it. So for example, I use Amazon for many years, and now all of a sudden I have to give my phone number so they can send me a ping if I do something that are out of the ordinary. If I order, for example, healthy food or diet food, then they know it's a deviation of my normal shopping pattern.
So basically what you're saying is that their analytics engine actually notice that you're out of your normal behavior.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
it prompts, and of course they compare that service to the service that you guys deliver within the company. And they say, well, look at the experience I get here and look at the experience. And it's really, really tough competing with somebody who's pouring millions into their primary battlefront.
Exactly.
So we are again seeing the consumerization driving the demands within a company, and demanding users are coming. Because as David also said, work sucks, especially in our area. Mid-level, high-level IT staff is becoming increasingly hard to adopt. And so we're really going to have a competitive situation about the right users. At the core of what we do, and this is really one of the crucial slides for Citrix, we have three things that we build into everything we do. We build for example, for our analytics products, you've seen security analytics. Now we came with performance analytics, and soon we will have this productivity analytics coming up. And it's at the core of everything we do. It's at the core of what we do with the workspace. We're very focused on the experience that users have, and in order to support that infrastructure, it's incredibly important that single sign-on not just becomes something about identity, but becomes something about what happens before the single sign-on after. It's a part of this ecosystem that we're actually delivering. So to give you an example, one of the demos that Morten and I like to do later, that we couldn't do, but we have a video showing the onboarding part of it, is that we want a consumer to be able, or we want a user to be able to take a brand new device, any device, out of a box, gets delivered just directly to the person, take it out, hook it up, put his email address in, and everything that he needs within the company gets installed on the device. The device either becomes a managed device or non-managed. The whole identity gets pushed onto the device. And that's what we're working on with these three: the productivity, the performance, and the security at the heart of everything we do.
And one of the main reasons for doing so is that we want to drive adoption of technologies that enables us to be more productive. But if we do not offer a solution that makes it easy to get there, users will find other ways to do their job.
Yeah. And one of the things, I had a chance to talk to a customer who actually bought 4,000 Raspberry Pis from End Computing. And there seems to be a gap between how he's able to onboard them and deliver the right experience on these devices. So the technology gap is something that we're really, really aware of. So for example, he couldn't do multi-screen. There is a multi-screen function when he's running SYN or virtual apps. I'm not say SYN.
Be aware of all the name changes, right?
So he wasn't able to do that. He wasn't able to deploy the right profiles and so on. And we believe that that's somewhere that we need to be. So we had a talk with this customer, and Morten is on him like a leech. So one of the things that, why do you need SSO? So identity is clearly becoming an issue. And if you heard David, the way that people work, you might work 3 days at one company and 2 days at another company. Do you really want that inside your identity infrastructure? Another thing is the way that companies communicate with customers means that you need to have their identity also and take care of it, especially in Europe when we have this GDPR thing. You really need to protect those information too. So all of a sudden you might be a company with 1,000 employees, but you have maybe 20,000 customers. So where do you need to have their identity, and how do you protect it? And how do you do all this analytic stuff? So that's especially in a market where the arms and legs within IT is becoming fewer. So you need the automation that we talked about. And single sign-on automation with our analytics is crucial to be delivering this experience that we want to deliver. And also, especially in Citrix, we just had an experience, let's call it that, where we got a chance to renew our password and use more complex passwords. So in order to support the IT department, when you're adapting these new services and making sure that you have the right person, it would have helped to have single sign-on across our entire platform. And that's one of the benefits that I see with single sign-on. More efficient. A lot of times...
Is it that easy?
No.
It's not?
No.
Anyone in here that's been working with Citrix products for a long time? Just show of hands. Really nice. Do you recognize this one?
Yeah.
Was it that easy? Hopefully we can change that in the future.
I don't think so. I'm just saying. Now, clearly, we are from the field. We're not from product management or anything
Sorry?
like that.
The activation from the web page, the client is installing. When you launch the receiver, the workspace app, it is asking for the single sign-on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's causing a lot of problems.
It is. That was not the intention, I guess.
We don't try to make trouble.
This is a journey for us as well. Right? So we're combining so many technologies from an on-premise perspective and a cloud perspective, and we're building out our identity platform. And why we're doing so is because we want to make it easier. Right? But of course, this is something that we're going to build out in the future as well, and look at any obstacles for end users to onboard to that solution easily. No, exactly.
Yeah.
So hire someone that can read then. Would that be the solution?
Documentation is not that.
Yeah.
So our point was just to say sometimes we make services available that would make your life easier. But I also run into companies where they say, well, we don't have the time to implement this. So they take an easy solution which fits the lowest bar. So I meet a lot of Citrix customers, and so does Morten, where they selected the lowest denominator within single sign-on instead of actually getting the experience to the user that our technology does. So really think about, we will show a little more. It will get more technical later in a few minutes. We will show some of the things, some of the steps that you can actually do to get this experience to your user. And to give you just an idea, at Citrix, we just throw a laptop at you when you start in the company, and then you get a token, and good luck with that. And you have a URL, and then you get a VDI dashboard, and then everything should be there. So that's how we do it. It's not a nice process, but it's getting there. So really, not just click off, enable single sign-on. Think about the single sign-on process, especially when you start to adopt, I hope, the micro apps that we have. Then you will start to have integration to different services where you also need to identify you in the right way to get the micro apps working properly. Within Citrix, we have multiple ways of doing single sign-on, and this is growing a lot. The things that we will show or talk about today is the web app, SaaS app, and then the MDX. We actually have an SDK within our MDX, which would help a lot if people used it, and the documentation was a little better.
That's a side note.
And then, of course, this native mobile app SSO is also our possibility to do single sign-on. We are more or less focused on the UAM part today on how we can support the workspace. So that's where we put our effort.
Exactly.
Because they didn't want to give us 2 hours for the session. So another trend, and I love these new Gartner quotes. Usually Gartner says in 10 years everybody will be here. Now they're only giving us 3 years before apparently our identity will move into a cloud service. So my point here being, some of the trends we are seeing, the acceleration is crazy. 5G is just 3 or 4 years out in the future. It will enable so much data to come into your data center. You will have access to so many services, and you will need to have a federated or a displaced identity platform that can talk to these services. I mean, it's simply staggering what kind of data load we will see in the future. People are starting to talk about LAN will disappear and WAN will be everywhere, and your user will be on a WAN all the time. How can you compete with a 5G connection with 1 gigabit connection? And in our office, we have 25 megabits
Something like
on
that.
a good day.
But maybe this also shows some of the difficulties some customers face when you're in a hybrid environment. You're starting to adopt different types of cloud services. You might have hosted services. You have your own services in your own infrastructure. How do you consolidate the way that users access these services? Anyone seen issues like that in the field? Okay, thank you very much.
One person.
No,
One person.
only one person, but this is something that we know, at least I have conversation with customers about. So how do we make sure that your identity platform is configured correctly, have access and can provide access to the different services independently of where those services reside?
Yeah. So in the old days, it was like building a high-speed railroad. So if you need to be, 100 meters up in 10 kilometers, you start 10 kilometers before. I'm just saying a lot of the technologies that is going to hit us is going to hit us within the next 3 to 4 years. Yeah. And the way you can secure your identity is to have an identity service, according to Gartner, in place, especially around your customer contacts and your partner contacts. Morten.
Was that my cue?
Yeah. Now we get into the technical.
We'll try to at least. So I'm just going to pick this one up. So we had a coaching session before we do these things, and I was told to stand still instead of walking around. It's a habit that I have. I'll try to do that. Let me know if I'm moving too much. But actually, the thing about IDP and identity, this is one of the vital areas that you need to look at in order to provide a good user experience and enable capabilities as single sign-on. So this is things you need to have in place, right? And as you can see up here, what we're doing with the endpoint management solution is to make sure that we can configure the endpoints. We can deliver certificates and configurations and applications, provide configuration that enables VPN connections or SaaS app connections and so on. So it's not only about single sign-on, it's making sure you have the foundations on the platforms that your users are working to enable these kind of services. And then, of course, when we have all these ease of access to different kind of services, we also need to have things like conditional access in place to make sure that we can cut off those connections if something arises that are not in the normal behavior. You heard that we just signed an agreement with Microsoft of doing conditional access integration with EMS on iOS and Android. This is a huge thing. We have our secure mail application. Oh, by the way, how many in here are using secure mail? Oh, I love to see so many hands. That's amazing. But one thing that we're doing as well is that we're making secure mail as an approved application. on the list of applications in EMS for conditional access, which prior to this was only consisting of Microsoft application. Again, showing the partnership that we have with Microsoft and how we can leverage that partnership to provide you with a better solution. But let's have a look at how we're configuring the endpoint. So when a device connects in, it could be a BYOD scenario, it could be a fully managed device scenario, but what we're able to do is that we connect through the workspace, but it can be intercepted and then enrolled into the endpoint management solution. And the endpoint management solution will then be able to provide a profile to that device, or to that workspace application that tells it, so this is the configuration you need to use. That can be audio configuration, graphics, but also things like certificates and Wi-Fi configurations. And this is all about making sure that the end user's onboarding experience of first-time use is as best as possible. They need to do, hopefully in the future, just about nothing other than opening the application, entering their credential sets, and then they have access to everything. So that's the goal we're moving towards. That means that we can support this type of access on basically any device that you're working on. So I can have an iOS device, I can have a MacBook, or I can have a virtualized machine. Independently of these platforms, we'll be able to deliver the workspace application, provide the foundation to do things like single sign-on. But it's an important step in order to provide that good user experience. Right. If we move a bit further, one thing that we also want to provide, because we can leverage the bulk enrollment technologies from the different hardware vendors, but that's not enough in order to provide that really great user experience. So giving them a type of out-of-the-box experience by them opening their device, automatically enrolling through Apple device enrollment program as an example. But we then, on top of that, enables administrators to easily configure the workspace experience on top of that. That enables the end user to basically open their device, get things installed and configured, and then connect to the services they want to work with. So using the bulk enrollment technologies, connecting to the endpoint management solution, deploying the profiles, and then you have the access. Whether that's virtual apps and desktops, files internally or in a cloud service, SaaS application or internal web applications, all consolidated through the workspace experience. So if we look at how we're doing that, well, one big item in this setup is the Citrix Cloud and the Citrix Cloud Identity Platform. That's where we easily can connect to things like your on-premise solutions or SaaS applications. We've got plus 100 different templates to configure single sign-on for SaaS services. Not only used for a Windows machine or a virtual machine access to that SaaS service, but it can be for iOS devices or Android devices. So covering basically all the different platforms that your end users are using on a daily basis. And as I said, going into the third-party clouds, even if you're using a browser, using a native mobile application, but it's all about how we configure that device to start with. So we make sure that the right technologies are in place, the right connections are in place, the right applications are installed so that the end user can start working just off the bat. So now this is an almost live demo. You ready for that? It might fail.
No, it won't.
You sure?
Yeah.
So let me just...
You need to switch when you're ready.
Yeah.
So this is the demo where we're going to take a Windows 10. We're going to do the enrollment of Workspace based on an email identity, and we're going to provision it. The only thing we don't have is where we don't have enabled the autopilot and all these things where it's an out-of-box experience. That's where you add it, and there's no branding. Now, Morten forgot to mention one important thing why the certificates and the control of the device instead of just pushing the workspace out. Now that we begin to support local applications for the workspace, it becomes increasingly important that you can authenticate those local applications with single sign-on. And you can only do that if you have this layer underneath doing the whole identity.
Exactly. So what we're doing here is that now that we start to bring in more and more capabilities for the Workspace app, we also need that foundation to not only provide the connectivity services and the VPN and the Wi-Fi configurations and everything, but if we're on a device where we're delivering native applications, we might also want to deploy policies that controls how the data flows are from those applications. So by leveraging things like Windows information protection policies, we can make sure that the enterprise application deployed to your devices only can interact with other applications that's a part of the enterprise suite. Right? Here we're going in and looking at the endpoint management solution, and just making sure that this is not enrolled.
The device that was enrolled on this user was another device. So
exactly.
After you will see two devices.
So just opening up the Citrix Workspace, how to add an account, add in your email address and click Add. That will spin off the Workspace application and we can add the account. So what happens now is that the Workspace knows that you need to enroll into Endpoint Management. So it will automatically kick off that process and guide the user through that process. That means that now we can deploy the configurations for the Workspace app. We can deploy policies for the platform itself. We can deploy applications. And the user can get productive a lot faster than you would otherwise do. Right. Click yes to that. Thank you, Eyal.
Okay.
So we'll just be enrolling the device into the endpoint management solution. That will provide us with the ability to, in this case, showing off that we can basically configure and enroll through the Workspace application, install the native applications as well, provide access to virtual apps and desktops, SaaS application, internal web applications. So that would pretty much cover what most users want access to. And if this is an onboarding experience, you open up your new laptop, and this is all you need to do to get started, to get access to all your enterprise services. So now we're there. This is an example of what we can do from a configuration perspective. So pre-configure that the natively installed application also shows up in your start menu. So not only installing the application, providing the access, but also configuring the device so you'd have that access from the start menu, from the Workspace application, providing that ease of access to all the different types of enterprise services that you need to work with. Let's go in and see in the settings and see how that enrollment went. Go to the account setting and
I'm clicking.
You're clicking and you're clicking. Yeah, I know that. Should be a bit faster, right? So now we're connected to our endpoint management solution. So now we have that hook into that platform so we can provide the end user with what they need from an application perspective, from a configuration and policy perspective. We have now that platform completely under control. And the user can go in and see what we're actually controlling. Right. So let's hop back to the endpoint management solution. See that that device is enrolled correctly. You have it there, the Windows desktop tablet. Perfect. So that's the process from a user perspective. This is what I need to do. They don't need to go into the admin console, though, and check whether they're enrolled or not. But that's how we can do that on a Windows platform. And there's the application that's installed. Close the demo, please. Perfect. Yeah?
Applications that are installed on that particular workstation, are they assigned to that user or they are assigned to a desktop tablet? So that any tool that's installed will pull those same applications?
Yes and no. So they're delivered to that device. So the question is, I'm sorry, I'm just going to repeat it for audio, is that is the installation of that application assigned to a specific user, or is it delivered from the membership of an AD group or something like that? Right? So we do it by membership of a delivery group in the endpoint management solution that are attached to an Active Directory group. Right.
But you're correct. It's personal. The apps are delivered to that specific user person.
On the device.
Yeah, for that user. So instead of you presenting a storefront where you have a library and you have some preferred for this user, these are the applications that this user has been allocated.
Exactly. So the whole point here is to make sure that the workspace gets all the policies, all the configurations, all the applications, and all the access delivered on that device. And from an SSO perspective, what we can do when we have that workspace device under management, we can provide many different types of SSO capabilities. Let's go in and look at a few of those. Right. So one thing that we need in order to make this happen, anyone that has been working with our NetScaler, a Citrix ADC, gateway service, it has different names, it resides in different places. So a few of you, right? So most of the magic around getting access to something, providing single sign-on and authentication and authorization for that matter, that leverages our NetScaler technologies. So we should have virtual appliances and hardware appliances that you can put on premise. So what we're doing now is that we're leveraging both the on-premise capabilities and the cloud service capabilities to provide you with these technologies that gives that great user experience, right? So if we look at the workspace SSO piece, there are a few requirements that you need to run through, but maybe the most sorry, was that a question?
That last slide.
Sorry?
In that last slide,
Yeah.
talking about SAML.
Yeah.
In particular, in the past, SAML and receiver client, the native client hasn't been compatible.
No.
Has that been fixed?
That has partially been fixed. So this is the combination of endpoint management and receiver, basically. So that enables us to use some of the capabilities from both of these solutions. We also had issues with certificate-based authentication, and one reason being that we could not automatically deploy the certificate and assign it to an application. But with endpoint management in that loop, we'll be able to configure that. So that enables us basically to do more. And that's why endpoint management is such an important part of making that workspace experience really good. So this is just a setup that you could look at and see how does this actually work. But let's say you have your device, you have the workspace app installed, you have a native mobile app installed that's been deployed by the endpoint management solution. But we don't have any capabilities of actually containerizing and controlling that application because it's a public app store application, right? But what we can do is that we can connect the Citrix Identity Platform to that SaaS service. So now we have these two combined, and what we can do then is that we can deploy everything through the endpoint management solution. We can then authenticate through the workspace service. We'll then get a token issued that we can use, and when the user clicks on the SaaS mobile application, whether that is Workday, Slack, Salesforce, etc., we can intercept that traffic, redirect that, and initiate the SAML authentication process. And at the end of the day, what we will get is a SAML authenticated session towards Salesforce as an example. We can then deliver that authentication token to that application. And then, whoops, I'm happy that this has a back button. So what basically happens there is that we provide that authentication token, and now that application can authenticate directly. So the user won't get prompted to authenticate when accessing Salesforce, Workday, Slack, etc. We can then, with the endpoint management solution, apply platform mobile application management policies on that public App Store app, partially containerizing the data flow from that application as well. Again, going back to why endpoint management is a good thing when you're deploying a workspace solution, because we can provide more controls for that platform and how applications interact and how policies are applied and how configurations are done.
Yeah, because third-party apps, they need two things. They need to know who you are, three things. Which platform are you on? Because Salesforce experience deviates if you're on a mobile phone or if you're on a tablet or if you're on a Windows device. So it needs to know which device you're on. Secondly, it needs to know which your site container you have. So Salesforce has a site that needs to be put in there. to know, okay, this is your Salesforce ID. And lastly, it needs your identity, so you know that, yeah, I don't have admin rights within Salesforce, and I shouldn't have. So those are the three things that the UEM actually adds to this experience.
So this one just shows that you might not have an ADFS solution or an Azure AD. You might have Okta or Ping in the mix. So we can connect to that as well. But it is basically the exact same process that you need to run through. You're just redirecting to your identity provider of your choice, right? And the same process runs through. The authentication tokens are delivered to the mobile app, and it has access to that SaaS service, right? So if we look at what do you actually need to do this? So there are a few things. I think we started out by saying there are some items that you need to have control over, which is your identity provider. How's that configured? How's that connected to all the different services that you want access to? And of course, your user identities. Some of the most important pieces in enabling your organization to leverage single sign-on, right? And then there are some pitfalls or caveats that you need to look at, right? How is the IDP chain controlled and how is it constructed so that you don't run into problems, which is also a very important piece. So let's do a almost live demo.
Yeah, again.
Wouldn't that be a good idea?
I just want to make one comment, because often when we're in the field, people, they say, oh, we like your Workspace Premium Plus, our SKU. But we want to take out the UEM part and get a discount for taking that out. There's a reason why it's in there, because it's the way that we deliver this experience. It's not because we want to push our endpoint management system. It's because it's part of giving the experience that you see on our demo booths. So now we're going to show a little demo where we're going to take a third-party app that needs these three things. It needs to know which device it's for. Am I pushing to an Android or an iOS? It needs to know the site. It's a Slack application, so it needs to know the Slack domain that we belong to. And then it needs the identity. So
let's take that off. Start by opening up the Workspace application. So, of course, when you do that, you need to authenticate, depending on the authentication timers that you have installed for or configured for your Workspace application. But you'll see here, I'm logging in. I have access to a certain set of applications. It could be SaaS service applications, it could be web applications. But when I click on the Slack application, the configuration deployed to this device says that you need to enroll in order to do this. Right? So we might have a BYOD device, but a native mobile application that requires enrollment from a corporate perspective. Right? And then it goes through the enrollment process. It kicks that off and it passes on the credential sets. So the end user won't have to do this again. But we cannot really go around the enrollment process from Apple. That has naturally end user steps included in it. So we need to run through that. It flips back, enrolls, opens up the Workspace app. So now you're enrolled. Now you have actually now we're installing the Slack application. At the same time, what we're doing from an endpoint management perspective is that we're delivering things like application configs, meaning seeding that application with the information needed to connect to the site that it needs to connect to. End user clicks on the application, gets its first time user experience from Slack, prompts the user, do you want to sign in? Yeah, I want to sign in. And now we should get access to that Slack channel or that Slack site that's been configured by the endpoint management service. However, we're not able to eliminate all end user steps because each of these applications has their own first time user experience and the user needs to run through this. But as you can see, no authentication prompts, only access directly. Thank you very much, Rachel. Yeah?
In that demo, are the applications being delivered purely by endpoint management, or is it also Intune?
So it could be, but in this case, we're using the endpoint management solution as the MDM agent. Right. Yeah?
Let's say you have Slack to point to you're not pointing straight to like Octo or Azure.
No.
You're pointing to the gateway SAMLs. So
Exactly.
could desktop users still have a single sign-on experience using whatever under the covers, Kerberos, whatever?
Yeah. They could. So one thing that we're using is that we have the gateway service in Citrix Cloud connected to the Citrix Identity Platform. That's connected to that IDP that actually performs the authentication. But since we already have an authenticated session, we can reuse that through the Identity Platform, right? So it doesn't really matter which platform that you're coming from. It's more about you're authenticated. Let's use that and translate that to something that makes that single sign-on to your SaaS service.
Sure. Does that work for desktops that maybe aren't workspace enabled? If I want mobile single sign-on like you just showed, with desktops that aren't workspace enabled, does that work? Or would that have to require a lot of extra configuration?
That would probably require some configuration, but that's a configuration you would be able to do with the Endpoint Management solution.
Sure.
Right. So it depends on whether it's the natively installed application or it's a browser service that you're accessing. So just off the bat, it would work with the web application.
We have 4 slides left and 3.5 minutes. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
The thing is, for logging from a desktop, to a desktop app, to the browser, you'll get the IDP login page.
Yeah.
On the desktop, right? And if your IDP supports integrated Windows authentication, you'll be able to get it as well. Now, we will be providing this eventually on Windows and Mac as well, using the same for application. Sure.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashish. So Secure Mail also offers single sign-on capabilities, and we have 2 different options. And I encourage you to look at that up in the documentation on how to configure that. But there are a few things you need to do in order to make that happen from an LDAP credential passover perspective. Another common way of doing single sign-on with Secure Mail is to use certificate-based authentication. That, of course, also requires some configurations, both from an endpoint management perspective, but also making sure that your certificate provider is configured correctly, and the endpoint management solution can actually issue certificates during enrollment and so on. So these are the 2 main ways of doing single sign-on for the Secure Mail application. And it just provides that's good user experience instead of you having to authenticate yourself each and every time you kick off an application for the first time. Then let us do that authentication for you. We have you authenticated within the solution already, so let's pass that on and make sure you have easy access to your applications. So for Citrix Files, anyone using Citrix Files in here?
yeah.
Oh, nice. Very good to see. It's like every year we have an increased number of users on the different applications, which is really good to see. And of course we can do single sign-on for the Citrix Files application as well. But the real beauty of this is that it's also what you say inter-app SSO. So I open one of the application, I need something from one of the other application. It just seamlessly flips to that, authenticates automatically, and provides you with access to the services that that specific application offers. So from an end user perspective, I don't need to worry about authenticating every time I open an application or try to access a service, whether that's in my own infrastructure or from a cloud perspective. Anyone familiar with our MDX technology? That was a bit less. I'm a bit disappointed about that. Mainly because it also provides a lot of capabilities from an application connectivity and also from a single sign-on perspective. Oh, absolutely.
So when it comes to third-party app, I know that our development team reaches out to some of the more known application developers. Yeah. Because as you saw for Slack, there was a lot of screens that you had to click, even though that we could actually introduce the users to the right Slack channel. So of course, I know it's something that drives our development team nuts when they see all these user interaction, because every time you have user interaction, something can go wrong. So the more we can do, so more than we sometimes go out to these developers and talk about our SDK. How can we actually help you make your application more enterprise ready? Now, when you do a project like this, you will most likely be in the driving seat of having the communication with that company developing the apps that you want to, the third-party apps that you want to deploy. So I'm just saying that is something where you as a customer needs to put in some effort, in order to get them to deliver an enterprise-ready app. And we have description on how to do that. So we are all out of time. Anything else? What's next?
I just want to add one thing. If you develop your own application, reach out to the local Citrix team. Have a conversation with them on how can we use the Citrix technology embedded in your application to provide that security and configuration and great user experience.
There is some more sessions.
Yeah.
Go see these sessions. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.